Well, hello there, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time. We're all going to pretend we didn't see that. Thank you for joining me for today's Cryptid Corner. Today's cryptid is, well, wait, are ghosts even cryptids? You know, there's a page for them on the Cryptid Wiki, so that's good enough for me. Also, it's October, and so it's spooky season, and if I can't talk about ghosts on my Cryptid Corner, then when am I gonna get to talk about them? So, let's start with the basics. What are ghosts? Generally speaking, ghosts are believed to be the spirits or souls of dead people or animals for whatever reason haven't moved on to where they're supposed to go next. They're said to linger in our world, sometimes appearing as apparitions, sometimes making noises, moving objects, or just giving people that creepy feeling that they're being watched. Now, here's where it gets interesting and complicated, because apparently not all ghosts are created equal. There's actually different categories of hauntings that paranormal investigators use to categorize their encounters. Now, there's intelligent hauntings, which are what most people think of when they think ghost. A spirit that can interact with the living, respond to questions, a ghost that is aware of its surroundings and of you. Now, the second type of ghost that is classified is residual hauntings, which is apparently more like a recording that plays over and over. The ghost in this case is usually not really considered a conscious entity. It's more like apparently an imprint of energy from a traumatic or emotionally charged event that just keeps replaying. The ghost generally is not believed to be able to see or interact with you, however. Okay, then there is poltergeists. These are rowdy ones. Everyone, I think, has heard of poltergeists. The name literally means noisy ghost in German. So they're known for moving objects, making sounds, generally just wreaking havoc and causing chaos. Some people think that they aren't ghosts at all, but are a form of psychokinetic energy that is coming from living people. Okay, then there's shadow people. These are the really creepy ones that people describe as dark, shadowy figures, usually seen in the peripheral vision. Are they ghosts? Are they something else? Interdimensional beings? Nobody really knows, and honestly, I don't like thinking about them that much because they kind of creep me out. Who came up with these? Probably paranormal investigators or whatever, but anyway, pretty interesting because it just kind of makes you wonder if people are experiencing fundamentally different phenomena that we're all just kind of grouping together under the ghost category. Now, before we dive deeper into history and theories, I want to talk about the ghosts' extended family around the world, or really just, I guess, the different cultural lenses that people see ghosts through. Because just like lake monsters and Bigfoot type creatures, pretty much every culture on Earth has ghost stories. But the details get really interesting and sometimes very specific. In Japan, you have
Grammarly's proactive
Yurei. I think I said that right. Basically, they're spirits of people who died with strong emotions or without proper burial rites. They're often depicted in white kimonos with long black hair and no feet, just kind of floating. There are different types of Yurei. Oh, I already forgot. Basically, there's different types depending on how they died or what they want. In Mexico, for sure, I think other Latin American cultures as well, but definitely Mexico, there is La Llorona. Now, she's basically the weeping woman who allegedly drowned her children and now wanders near bodies of water, crying and looking for them. Her story has been told for generations, and so there are many regional variations. The one that I'm familiar with is basically that she was in like an angry rage and she murdered her children by drowning them in the ocean, and then immediately was filled with regret for what she did after she did it and realized. And so now she sticks around the sea at night, wailing and looking for her children and grabbing any kids she comes on, basically, because she thinks they might be hers, or she's just like desperate for kids, I guess, weirdly. Whatever. She's a kid snatcher. That's what I heard. And so basically, I think this is basically just like a story for parents to scare their kids away from the ocean at night, which pretty smart. But there's also some really interesting scholarly theories that and research that supports her origin sort of being in pre-Hispanic America and even specifically Aztec mythology. So that's pretty interesting. Take that as you will. In Ireland and Scotland, you have banshees, which are female spirits whose wailing supposedly predicts someone's death. The name comes from the Irish. Let's see. I've got to figure out how to pronounce this. Bansida? I don't know how to say it, I'm sorry. But it comes from that word which means woman of the fairy mound. There are hungry ghosts in Chinese and specifically Buddhist tradition, which are spirits trapped in a state of suffering because of greed or bad deeds in life. There's literally a whole festival, the Hungry Ghost Festival, dedicated to appeasing them. I could go on and on and on forever because literally every culture has their own specific ghost traditions, and many of them typically that have grown and developed over time as well. But basically, I just wanted to go over this super briefly because I think it's fascinating how universal the concept is, while the details do vary so much. Okay, so quickly here, I've just been thinking about this a lot, and I kind of wanted to get a little nerdy about it for a second because the etymology of ghost, I think, kind of reveals something about how our concept of ghosts has changed. So the word ghost comes from Old English ghast, I think that's how you say it, which originally just meant spirit or soul, but not necessarily a scary or a dead one. It was related to the German Geist and could either refer to Holy Spirit, your living soul, or the breath of life. Now, compare that to how we use ghost today. When we say ghost, we almost always mean something spooky, something dead, something that haunts. We don't say the Holy Ghost that much anymore, we say Holy Spirit. We've linguistically separated the concept of spirit as life force from spirit as scary dead thing. I think this shift tells us something about how Western culture specifically has changed its relationship with death and the spirit world. In animistic traditions, which are some of the oldest spiritual belief systems in human history, spirits are everywhere. They're in the trees, in the rivers, in the mountains, and yes, in ancestors. But these spirits are not necessarily negative or scary. They're just there. They're part of the world. Indigenous cultures around the world have maintained these beliefs where ancestors are honored and spirits of all kinds are seen as guides or protectors. Not typically, although, you know, sometimes animistic traditions still have bad spirits too, but typically not necessarily something to be feared. Many more traditional religions also have this more integrated view of spirits. Shintoism, there is kami, which are spirits which inhabit natural objects, and deceased ancestors become kami. In various African traditional religions, ancestors play active roles in the lives of the living and are venerated, not feared. In Hinduism, ancestors are honored through specific rituals. Anyway, I guess just somewhere along the way, particularly in Western Christianity, death and spirits became associated with fear. The dead were supposed to move on to heaven or hell, period. So, if a spirit was still hanging around, that was wrong, unnatural, problematic. Ghost stories in medieval Europe often are moral tales about souls in purgatory or demons in disguise. So you have this shift from spirits are part of the natural world to ghosts are scary apparitions that shouldn't exist. I guess what I'm saying is our fear of ghosts seems to be at least somewhat, if not extremely, cultural. Maybe ghosts wouldn't be scary if we thought about them the way our ancestors did, as just another part of existence. Okay, now, let us drift back into ancient history to see the earliest hauntings. One of the oldest ghost stories I could find comes from ancient Mesopotamia, and actually comes from probably the oldest story in recorded history. There's a clay tablet from around 1500 BCE that tells the story of a ghost who returns to tell his friend about the afterlife. Now, this tablet is actually part of a much larger collection of tablets, of which there are several variations of, known collectively as the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's right. This ghost story is from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Did you know the Epic of Gilgamesh has a ghost in it? Well, for those of you unfamiliar, Gilgamesh's friend Enkidu dies, and his ghost comes back to describe the afterlife to Gilgamesh, which, spoiler alert, it does not sound great. Now, the ancient Egyptians had a whole super complex belief system about the afterlife and spirits. They believed in Ka, life force, and Ba, personality, that could leave the body and potentially haunt the living if burial rites were not performed correctly. That is part of why they were so obsessed with proper mummification and burial. They wanted to make sure the dead stayed dead in the right way. The ancient Greeks and Romans have tons of ghost stories. One of my favorites, and one of the oldest detailed ghost stories we have that allegedly actually happened, comes from Pliny the Younger. So he tells this story about a house in Athens that nobody would live in or rent because apparently was haunted. There was this ghost of an old man all chained up who would rattle around at night. Eventually, a philosopher named Athenodorus, I think I said that right, decided to investigate. So he rented the house, and when the ghost appeared, he followed it out to the courtyard where it disappeared. The next day, they dug up the spot and found a skeleton in chains. They gave it a proper burial and the hauntings stopped. That's basically every ghost story plot ever, right? Improper burial, restless spirit, proper burial fixes it. The tropes have not changed in 2,000 years. In ancient China, ghost stories were also really common. There are records from the Han Dynasty, which lasted about 206 BCE to 220 CE, about ghosts and spirits. And by the time you get to the Tang Dynasty, from 618 to 907 CE, there were whole collections of ghost stories being published. These stories often involved wronged women returning as ghosts to seek justice, or scholars encountering beautiful female ghosts. What's really interesting to me is that in medieval Europe, ghost stories take on this very Christian moral dimension. There are tons of accounts from medieval chroniclers about ghosts appearing to people, but these ghosts are almost always there to deliver a message about repentance, or just try and warn people about purgatory, or sometimes they're even demons in disguise trying to trick people. Now, the church was really suspicious of ghosts because theologically, souls should be in heaven, hell, or purgatory, not hanging around on earth. Now we fast forward to the 1800s and we jump into the spiritualism movement, which is honestly wild. Spiritualism definitely has earlier roots and in its influences, and it actually went on to sprout a whole bunch of other super interesting and unfortunately frequently racist kind of philosophies, spiritual movements, and religions. As much as I would love to, I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but one of the places and kind of situations that spiritualism really got its footing in was in New York in 1848 with the Fox sisters, Margaret, Kate, and Leah Fox. They claimed they could communicate with spirits through knocking sounds. In this time period in general, like, seances became fashionable, mediums were everywhere, people were desperate to contact their dead loved ones, especially after major cultural tragedies in the US like the Civil War. The thing is, the Fox sisters eventually confessed that they had been faking it. Margaret admitted in 1888 that they made the knocking sounds by cracking their toe joints. Let me try it, hold on. Did you guys hear that? I think there's a ghost in here. But anyways, by then spiritualism was too big to stop anyway, and like I said, it not only took on a life of its own, but went on to inspire and influence many other traditions and trends. This era also gave us spirit photography, which was supposedly photographic evidence of ghosts. Photographers would produce images showing translucent figures hovering around living people. Most of these were done through double exposure or other tricks, but people wanted to believe. Let's talk about some of the most famous haunted places and more modern ghost encounters. Alright, the Tower of London. Probably one of the most famously haunted places in the world. It makes sense, it's almost 1,000 years old and a lot of people have died there. The most famous ghost is supposedly Anne Boleyn, I guess. I've heard of her, but like, who cares? No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, she was Henry VIII's second wife, who was beheaded there in 1536. Apparently, guards and visitors alike have reported seeing a headless woman in a white dress, sometimes with her head tucked under her arm. Are these reports reliable? I don't know, but there are a lot of them spanning the centuries. Okay, the Stanley Hotel in Colorado is extremely famous because Stephen King stayed there and it inspired The Shining. But even before Stephen King, there were reports of paranormal activity, particularly the ghost of F.O. Stanley, the hotel's founder, who allegedly takes to playing piano in the parlor room. Then there is the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, which opened in 1829 and closed in 1971. It was known for extremely harsh conditions and solitary confinement. Now it is a historic site and a museum, but there have been countless reports of paranormal activity. Shadowy figures, disembodied laughter, voices, footsteps. Guards and visitors report overwhelming feelings of dread in certain cell blocks. Okay, now let's get to some of the more recent and specific. There is the Enfield Poltergeist, 1977 to 1979. It's one of the most documented poltergeist cases ever. In Enfield, London, the Hodgson, that family, particularly their two young daughters, experienced furniture moving, objects flying, knocking sounds, and even alleged cases of levitation and possession. The case was investigated by Maurice Grosse from the Society for Psychical Research, who documented hundreds of incidents. Skeptics argue it was just the children playing pranks, and a few of the phenomena have been proven to have been faked, but other phenomena were witnessed by multiple independent observers, including police officers. Then there is the Conjuring House, which is also known as the Perron family haunting, 1971 through 1980. The Perron family moved into a farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, and allegedly experienced intense paranormal activity for 9 years. The case was investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren, super famous paranormal investigators. It later became the basis for the movie The Conjuring. Family reported apparitions, objects moving, terrible smells, and alleged physical attacks. Now, the Warrens are very controversial, to say the least. Many of their cases have been debunked or heavily criticized, but the Perron family members have consistently maintained their story for decades. Just gotta throw this one out here. So much recent doorbell camera footage. In this age of Ring cameras and like more accessible home security systems, we've been getting more and more alleged ghost footage just from regular people's homes. There have been several viral videos in the past few years showing shadowy figures, mysterious lights, or objects moving on their own. The thing is, with AI and editing software in general being what it is now, it's harder than ever to trust video evidence. But at the same time, we have more cameras than ever before. So, if ghosts are real, shouldn't we be capturing them more often? So, let's dive into some of the most famous alleged photographic evidence of ghosts, because this is where things get very interesting and controversial. Now, there is the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, 1936. This is probably the most famous ghost photograph ever taken. It shows this misty, translucent figure descending a staircase at Raynham Hall in Norfolk, England. The photo was taken by two photographers from Country Life magazine, Captain Provand and Indre Shira. The story goes that Shira saw the figure and shouted for Provand to take the photo. The negative was examined and no evidence of tampering was found. Skeptics have suggested everything from double exposure to chemical defects on the film, but no one's been able to definitively prove it's fake. Unlike the surgeon's photo of Nessie, this one actually falls more in line, I think, with Patterson-Gimlin film, although Patterson-Gimlin film was controversial, but I think it falls more in line with Patterson-Gimlin film, where it hasn't fully been debunked. There is the Tulip Staircase ghost of 1966. A retired Canadian named Ralph Hardy took a photo of the Tulip Staircase in the Queen's House section of the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. When developed, the photo showed a shrouded figure climbing the stairs. Ghosts really seem to like stairs for some reason. The museum and Kodak examined the negative and found no evidence of tampering. It's been analyzed by numerous experts over the years with no consensus on what it actually shows. Then we have the Goddard's Squadron photograph of 1919. This one is really eerie. Sir Victor Goddard, I'm so bad at pronouncing names. Sir Victor Goddard took a group photograph of his squadron at a Royal Air Force base. When developed, an extra face appeared in the background. Allegedly the face of Freddie Jackson, a mechanic who had died 2 days earlier in an accident. Jackson's funeral had been held on the day the photo was taken, and the face is clearly visible and recognizable to those who knew him. Again, no evidence of tampering has been found, though skeptics suggest it could be a form of pareidolia or some kind of accidental double exposure. Now, here's the thing about ghost photography. The Victorian era was absolutely riddled with fake spirit photographers. Mediums and photographers made bank by producing images with ghostly figures that were almost always created through double exposure, long exposure times, or straight up using props and costumes. So there's this huge history of fraudulent ghost photos, which makes every supposedly genuine one automatically suspect. Okay, now let's talk about some scientific explanations for what is actually going on if ghosts aren't ghosts. Okay, infrasound. This one is one of my favorites because it gets so weird. Infrasound refers to sound waves below 20 hertz, which is below the range of human hearing. We can't consciously hear it, but our bodies can still detect it, and it can have some really strange effects. Studies have shown that exposure to infrasound can cause feelings of unease, anxiety, or dread, feelings of being watched, visual distortions or hallucinations, even seeing shadowy figures in peripheral vision. Where does infrasound come from? Natural sources, including wind, storms, and even certain building structures that vibrate at low frequencies. Vicky Tandy, an engineer, famously discovered that his haunted laboratory was actually being affected by infrasound from a ventilation fan, and when the fan was fixed, the hauntings stopped. Okay, carbon monoxide poisoning. This one is scary in a completely different way. Carbon monoxide, if you don't know, is an odorless, colorless gas that can cause hallucination, feelings of dread, feeling of a presence, auditory hallucinations, and memory problems. In the late 1800s, many haunted houses probably had furnace or gas leaks. William Wilmer published a study in 1921 about a family experiencing vivid hallucinations and paranormal phenomena that completely stopped after their furnace was fixed. Okay, then there's sleep paralysis, a phenomena where you wake up but you can't move, often accompanied by a feeling of presence in the room, pressure on your chest, visual or auditory hallucinations, and intense fear. Sleep paralysis happens when your brain wakes up before the paralysis that normally occurs during REM sleep has worn off. So it's terrifying, and many ghost encounters, especially bedroom ones might actually be sleep paralysis. Shout out to electromagnetic fields. Some studies have suggested that electromagnetic fields can affect the temporal lobes of the brain, potentially causing feelings of a presence, hallucinations, strange sensations, and feelings of fear and unease. There's just pareidolia, I think that's how you say it, which is just our brain's tendency to see patterns, especially faces, in random stimuli. It's why we see faces in cloud, burnt toasts, wood grain. It's also why people might see ghostly figures in the shadows, mist, or blurry photographs. Our brains are wired to recognize human forms. And there's also simply the power of suggestion and expectation. If someone tells you a place is haunted, you're more likely to interpret ambiguous stimuli as a paranormal ghost. Okay, but let's say none of these explanations account for every ghost sighting. What might ghosts actually be if they're real? Well, there is the traditional spirit theory, the classic explanation. Ghosts are the conscious spirits of people who have died but haven't moved on yet for whatever reason. Maybe they're attached to a place or a person, or they have unfinished business, whatnot. This is the oldest and most widespread explanation across cultures. Then you come into the stone tape theory, which is the idea that buildings, objects, or places can somehow record events and play them back under the right conditions. It's like the environment itself acts as a recording medium. This one is really nice because it would explain residual hauntings, where the same scene plays out repeatedly and the ghost doesn't interact or really seem aware of observers. The theory is named after a BBC TV movie from 1972, but the concept is much older. Then you get into quantum consciousness theories. I feel like every video I'm bringing this up nowadays. But anyway, some people try to explain ghosts by using quantum physics, specifically theories about consciousness and the nature of observation. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have proposed that consciousness might be a quantum phenomenon, and some have speculated that consciousness might persist after death in some form. Mainstream quantum physicists would generally reject these applications of quantum theory, as currently quantum physics typically only matter at a subatomic level. It's an interesting idea that some people find compelling, and we still don't know so much about the field. Okay, getting even more woo, there's the interdimensional time slip theory. This is one of my favorites to think about, even though there's absolutely no way to prove it. What if ghosts aren't the dead at all, but beings from another dimension or glimpses into the past or future? So like, imagine time isn't linear, and under certain conditions we are like passing by each other, or we're near each other on some sort of, I don't know, I imagine as a spiral. I don't know, what do you guys imagine time as? But anyway, for some reason at some points we can see through this sort of veil between points in time. And so maybe when someone sees like a Victorian woman walking through a wall, she's actually doing something like completely normal. Again, there's absolutely no scientific evidence for this, but it's a really fun framework for thinking about paranormal phenomenon, because it doesn't require violating the laws of physics as we understand them, and it just requires that you believe that there's more to reality than we can normally perceive. Okay, finally, this is something that really makes me think. I'm not an expert in this whatsoever, but I've just been thinking, what if electromagnetic fields aren't just causing hallucinations of ghosts, but are part of how the spirits manifest? So think about it. Consciousness in living people involves electrical signals. Neurons communicate through electrical impulses. Our thoughts, our memories, our personality, all encoded in patterns of electrical activity. What if when we die, or even, let's forget death here, what if it's not even part of that? What if, who knows? What if somehow an imprint or echo of that electrical pattern exists beyond our physical, self, right? Because electromagnetic fields are not physical. Anyways, what if consciousness can exist as a form of energy or information, and it interacts with the physical world through electromagnetic fields? That would explain why ghost encounters often correlate with EMF spikes, why they seem to affect electronics, and why they're sometimes captured on video and audio equipment. So my personal little crackpot theory is that it's not that the EMF is creating a hallucination, it's that the EMF is the ghost, or at least the physical signature of something non-physical interacting with our dimension. Maybe both are true. Maybe the spirit is real and electromagnetic disturbance is how we detect its presence. So ghosts are definitely one of those things that you can't prove by science and you can't really expect to. And I think because of that, I'm never going to be one of those people that expects everyone to believe in ghosts definitively. You know what I'm saying? But also, can you measure love? I feel like there's all sorts of things that we know exist that we can't actually measure in repeatable scientific experiments. Like, we all know, like, love is a thing, right? But who can actually perfectly define it? Who can demonstrate it? Who can put a repeatable experiment where it's demonstrated every time? I don't know. Maybe you can, but I would like to see that. Although it's a bit of a cop-out because obviously, if it's a spiritual phenomenon, then it's kind of, you get bypassed by having to prove yourself. And so I think you've got to kind of grapple with both of those things, you know? I have never seen a ghost. I wish I have. But I don't think I have. I've definitely felt something, like I get like a vibe. The more I learn about consciousness and energy and the sheer strangeness of quantum physics and the nature of reality itself, the less certain I am about what is possible and what isn't. We like to think that we understand the world and that science has explained away most of the mysteries, and we live in a very rational, knowable universe. But we don't even understand what consciousness is, why we're aware, why we have subjective experiences, why there's something it's like to be us. If we can't explain consciousness in the living, how can we be so sure what happens to it when we die? Here's what really gets me. People all over the world, across history, have reported encounters with the dead. Not just seeing things in the shadows and hearing old creaks in houses. I'm talking about people who see deceased loved ones with perfect clarity. I think about those medieval chroniclers, the monks and priests who just wrote matter-of-factly about ghost encounters. These were educated people, many of them skeptical by nature. They had everything to lose by reporting false information, and yet they wrote about ghosts like it was just a thing that happened. I think about indigenous cultures and cultures that didn't so much separate the living from the dead the way that Western Christianity did, and remained more animistic beliefs where spirits are just a part of the world. Were they wrong? Or did we lose something when we decided that the dead had to stay dead? And we built a wall between the material and the spiritual. So, do I believe in ghosts? Yeah, I think I do. I don't know exactly what they are. I think they might be multiple different things, like a lot of these cryptids we look at. Cryptids. I don't know if they're conscious spirits, electromagnetic imprints, interdimensional bleed through, all of the above, something else entirely. I think consciousness is stranger and more resilient than we give it credit for. I think death might not be the clean ending that we pretend it is. I think that we've known this for a long time as well. So, happy early Halloween! After hearing all of this, what do you think? Do you believe in ghosts? Have you ever experienced something ghostly you couldn't explain? I have not ever, but I know so many people who have. My own father has seen at least 2 ghosts in his life. And I have a whole video interviewing people about ghosts. Watch my video interviewing people about ghosts! But anyways, drop your ghost stories in the comments. I would absolutely love to hear them. And also let me know what cryptid or general paranormal entity you want to hear me talk about next time on Cryptid Corner. Thank you so much for watching this spooky edition of Cryptid Corner. And if you enjoyed the video, please do like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps me out, and it lets me know that you want to see more cryptid content. So stay curious, stay skeptical, but also maybe stay a little scared. Okay, I will see you next time, or maybe you'll see me first. Who knows? Okay, bye!